listen and welcome to Light on Light Through, episode 419. Well, time loop stories about a recurrent, involuntary, often daily trip to the past have been very well represented in movies like Groundhog Day, Source Code. I'm sure you heard of at least Groundhog Day. Another good time loop movie is Palm Springs. This subset of time travel in science fiction and fantasy has been less represented in novels, which would make Solvej Balle, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that name not correctly, it's spelled Solvej, second name Balle. She has written a 7-volume series called On the Calculation of Volume. And time loops are such an intriguing thing in science fiction that a series that would even be just one small volume would be welcome. But On the Calculation of Volume has additional treats for the mind. Now, I found out about this series just about a month ago. My friend Dirk van Len told me about this series on Facebook. So I bought the first volume. I finished reading it in the wee hours of the morning, and then bought the other 3 volumes, volumes 2, 3, and 4, that are now available via Kindle in English, and I got these on Amazon. So here's the setup of the story and the setup of the series. Tara and Thomas Selter are antiquarian book dealers in France, which makes them appealing to me already. Tara travels to Paris to buy some books, and that's when, November 18th, the time loop commences, because she wakes up the next morning and discovers that the rest of the world around her is waking up along with her on November 18th. And when she returns home, she discovers that Thomas, her husband, is with the rest of the world. They're living their lives in a world in which the days progress as they do, just for you and me. But Tara lives through November 18th over and over and over again. So we're off and running in this time loop tale. Now, as is the case with most other time loop stories, Tara has the advantage of knowing what's going to happen hour by hour, minute by minute, as she lives in November 18th every day. And of course, as is also the case with most other time loop stories, this advantage soon becomes a burden and a curse. And this sets up the heart of the story and the series as Tara struggles to understand what's going on so she can surmount the steel grip of this time loop. She tells Thomas what's happening, the same story plus what happened on the previous day, and he, by and large, tries to help. They visit a library to read up on, quote, parallel universes and multiple worlds. Wow. Reading that was music to my eyes. I wasn't listening to the audiobook, I was reading it. I had to wonder if that library in this first volume of a 7-volume series had a copy of its real life and alternate history of the Beatles. Hey, if you're wondering what that is all about, you'll find a link to that novel in the show notes. But the metaphysics of time loops, fun as they may be for the reader, are kind of hell for the character. Tara struggles to understand what's up, but nothing adds up. Her hair grows because her body is progressing even as the world is on daily replay, and she notes that, quote, I cut my nails, or rather I cut them again slowly, over the sink in the bathroom because they had grown as if time existed and I was snipping tiny slivers of time into the sink. Then I turn on the faucet and I wash them down the drain, unquote. Wow, that's very good writing, isn't it? But other things in the November 18th world keep reappearing. They're not washed down any drain. And they reappear exactly as they were or are, and still other items get consumed and disappear. And those vexing inconsistencies resist being washed down the drain or anywhere. Now, I don't know if Solvej Balle intended to write a 7-volume series when she wrote the first volume, but such metaphysical complexities are grist for the mill of multiple volumes, and now I'll tell you about the second volume. It picked up just where the first volume left off, but was noticeably different in its pace, emotional valence, and mode of storytelling. It told us about life in the loop lane. That's a phrase that I came up with. It was not in the book. It's a little lame, but I like it. Anyway, the first half of this second volume of On the Calculation of Volume, that was reminiscent, this second volume, of Canterbury Tales, as Tara travels around Europe in pursuit of weather conditions and climates that mirror the seasons. She is struggling to recapture the sense of our reality where there are obviously seasons. Now, this is a good idea, I think, for someone who's trapped on a single day, November 18th, happening over and over. But with the exception of a visit to her parents and a very harrowing car ride in Finland, the actual stories Tara encounters and constructs are a little less than enthralling. Now, to be clear, the writing here is sharp and evocative. Tara, on her travels, meets someone named Jeanette. Here's another quote. I told her my name was Tara. She didn't think that sounded French or Belgian. I didn't think her name sounded particularly Norwegian either, but I didn't say that, unquote. It's fun to read piquant little observations like that amidst this huge distortion of time, but I did yearn to see more of the contesting of those distortions that we see so vividly in the first volume. Tara settles down in the second part of the second volume, but with the exception of the theft of her bag, we get long internal disquisitions from Tara on the hopelessness of her situation, so much so that at times I thought I was reading Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure. I was relieved, at least partially, by the realization that she's not been, quote, betrayed, rejected, forsaken, unquote. She can go back to her husband, Thomas, at any time, albeit only on the time encased in or on November 18th. And the final part of Book 2 finds Tara in pursuit of all the knowledge she can find about the Roman Empire and its decline. In that pursuit, the author has something in common with Isaac Asimov, whose Foundation series was jump-started by Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. I'm sure many of you have heard of that book. Now, there are 5 more novels in this series. I would have read them anyway, but the totally out of left field development at the end of the second book made it a sure thing that I dive into book 3 immediately. So, book 3, unlike book 2, changed everything in this mega story, and it was every bit as powerful as book 1. The key new ingredients were fellow travelers, inmates of November 18th. Henry joining Tara was signaled by the teaser at the end of book 2, and before book 3 is over, the two are joined by Olga and Ralph, and a new teaser at the end of book 3 alerts us to more people who live over and over in November 18th. Henry, Olga, and Ralph arrive in the story at different times. Ralph's introduction is the most packed with possibilities. Tara learns about him in the first place from Olga, who's desperate to find him. He went missing after he and Olga had connected. I initially thought Ralph was missing from November 18th because he'd found a way out of that time loop, which I assume made him unavailable for some reason in the November 18ths that Olga, joined later by Tara and Henry, was searching. But he turns up, and the voices of Henry, Olga, and then Ralph give the author, Solvej Balle, the opportunity to explore the metaphysics of loopism more widely than she did with just Tara. Ralph sees his and the other three's endless presence on November 18th as a way they, quote, can alert people on the brink of disaster, unquote. It's a logical and lofty goal. I mean, if you know a car is going to crash in a particular place on November 18th, you can prevent the crash by arranging for a roadblock on a subsequent November 18th, or better, if the crash is due to something wrong with the car, you can fix it, assuming those kind of changes stick with November 18th. Furthermore, to do this on a massive scale as possible, Ralph wants to, quote, develop an interspace, a kind of high-speed bridge between the analog and digital worlds capable of converting vast volumes of data back and forth with minimal effort, with no information lost, and fast enough to save lives. A time loop man with a plan indeed. You know, we could use a bridge like that in our off-page, real-life world. Now, there are lots of other goodies in this third volume of Tara's adventure, including books by fictitious authors. Focus on the city of Bremen, where the four come to live. By the way, Cora Boulay, who has been a guest on this podcast a couple of times, she's a Hugo winner. She lives in Bremen, too. And we also hear about Raphael's famous School of Athens fresco, which always reminded me of the cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper. Now, my review of book 4 in this magical mystery tour revolving time follows. And in book 4, which I think of as a story of death and life, the key thing in book 3 was multiplication, which meant that what started out as just one person stuck in November 18th increased to 2 people, then 4 people, then 5 people. But after reading the 4th book of the series, which actually I just finished yesterday, I think I might well have been premature in talking so much about the multiplicity in the previous volume, because the number of people trapped in November 18th in the 4th book, well, they multiply faster than bunnies. And as I've already said, this gives the author an avenue to explore a myriad of angles and theories about what happened to her and her now numerous temporal siblings, as each of them offer their evolving views. Now, these range from the nature of time to multiple universes to the nature of everything organic and manufactured in their lives and throughout history. Everyone has an opinion, a shade of opinion, sometimes, as Tara herself wondering, quote, weren't our vehicles first and foremost a form of protection, unquote? By vehicles, she was talking about automobiles. And, that struck a chord in me because it reminded me of something Marshall McLuhan once said to me as we strolled the streets of Toronto on one of my visits back in the late 1970s with my wife. Marshall McLuhan said, the automobile retrieves the knight in shining armor. And he said this as a Chevy Impala from the 1950s, with fins and all, drove by gleaming in the sun. Now, sometimes, on the other hand, however, the insights were so recondite, that's a fancy word for being so deep and not very clear, that they didn't make sense, at least not to me. One of the new character inmates of November 18th, Millie, for example, shares her opinion that, quote, we're the ones who can kill in the 18th, but not them, that is, we, the readers, and you, the listeners. Back to what Millie is saying, she continues and says, quote, when they kill, their actions vanish overnight. When we kill, that is, the people stuck in November 18th, we end lives irrevocably. And then she adds, quote, we were both more dangerous and more vulnerable than those who moved through the world, believing that the 18th was simply a day between the 17th and the 19th, because no matter what happened to them, they would wake up to the 18th again, unquote. And I didn't quite get that. I assume I and you move through a world in which the 18th of any month is simply a day between the 17th and the 19th. And if someone in our world died, we would not wake up the next day and find them alive again, right? So I don't know what happened in Volume 4. Maybe an error crept into the translation. Maybe an error in my scrambled brain. That's always possible. Or if not, maybe I'm living in a world which is somehow even more science fictional than I thought. But life and death do play a very significant role in this fourth volume. For some reason, a few plants begin to bud and grow indoors in this repeating day. In other words, every day the 18th repeats, the potatoes grow bigger. How could that be if the 18th is just repeating itself? Again, this gets into the metaphysics, these fascinating metaphysics that are explored in this series. And, I wondered at that point, as I was reading Volume 4, what would happen if someone became pregnant or was pregnant when she entered the time loop. And then, sure enough, another character, Sonia, reveals she is carrying a baby. But sadly, she loses the baby. It just disappears. And throughout these 4 volumes, there is always that something, that little something that doesn't quite add up. I mean, every time Tara thinks she has it figured out, she bumps into something that doesn't quite make sense. This is one of the pleasures of reading this series, because that's the way real life is, isn't it? We think we have something totally figured out, and then something happens and it doesn't quite add up. Now, as usual, There is a potential game changer in the closing pages of this fourth volume, and I'm not going to tell you what it was, except that I was thinking about something like that as I read this fourth volume. And again, I'll say there are 7 volumes in this series, and only the 5th volume is available in English in the US in paperback, and I'm sorely tempted to get it. But I've been reading this metaphysical adventure so far in Kindle, and I'd like to keep it that way for a couple of reasons. One, when I'm reading a book that I know I'm going to review, it's very easy to take notes in a Kindle. Right? I just capture the text and I save it, and then after I finish reading the book, I see what all my notes are. That's easier than scribbling something down on paper. Another reason, as you listeners of this podcast may well know, I'm an incredible cheapskate, and the Kindle is cheaper than the paperback book. So Amazon says the Kindle to Volume 5 of the English translation of this intriguing, wonderful series will be coming this November. But we'll see if I can wait that long. I'm enjoying this so much, I may break down and buy the paperback anyway. And I hope you enjoyed this review of the 4 volumes of On the Calculation of Volume. I will be back here soon, I promise, with another episode of Light On, Light Through. It could be another review. It could be another review of a book. You know, I review books all too rarely. But it could also be a review of a television series or a movie or an interview. So I hope you keep listening. In the meantime, stay safe, stay sound, and enjoy.
The Light on Light Through podcast.
Athens, 2042 AD. She ripped the paper in half, then ripped the halves, then ripped what was left again into bits and pieces of history that could have been. Sierra Waters had read once that, years ago, it was thought that men made love for the thrill, while women made love for the sense of connection it gave them.
Curled Up with a Good Book says, Sierra Waters is sexy as hell. You can find out more about The Plot to Save Socrates by Paul Levinson at theplottoSaveSocrates.com.
Your brilliant story, it's real life.
Paul Levinson's Silk Code, about an ancient biotech war raging on in secret for centuries.
Reading words from Paul Levinson's mind. His tales take the stage, leave the world behind. Spinning histories in a brand new light, with the Beatles alive through the Mersey night. Oh, what can we do? Levinson